I realized I forgot to unpause my mic. Or it wasn't that it was muted. It was turned off. But hello everyone. How are you? I hope everyone's doing quite well. I had a mini panic there right before I started, um, because I went to get some water, so I had twisted off the top and filled it up and stuff and put it on my desk, and then I reached to grab it and I realized that the top wasn't even screwed on, so there was the potential for me to knock that and spill it all over my PC and all over my keyboard and desk, and that would have been a terrible situation to happen. I am a little like freaked at that concept occurring, so I always keep like any drink that I have is always on the left side of my desk, which is where my PC isn't. So I know where my PC is, and I know this because it is where it isn't, and I keep the liquids where it isn't. It is handy though because I am left-handed, so it's natural for me to keep stuff on that side. But if even if I was right-handed and it would be I would pick up a drink with my right hand, it would just be a little iffy to do so. So I keep things well away from it and make sure there isn't any worry about it breaking. And as well, I also it's kind of between two things, so it's very very difficult to kind of bump into it or knock it over. Although it is standing on like two blocks of wood, which just gets it off the ground and away from the carpet floor, so that it's not like so that the fan on the I assume there's a fan anyway on the what's it called, the battery is isn't like just sucking up dust. I can't imagine that would be good. But yeah, it has like a good, I'd say a good like 3 or 4 inches off the ground. It's pretty grand. But I hope everyone's day has been well. Did I send out a message to everything? I think I did. Why do I have two instances of via tube mini opened? That shouldn't. I'm gonna close one, and hopefully I don't disappear. Uh, oh, oh, I'm back. Okay. I thought I disappeared for a moment, but I don't think I did. But all good. But yeah, I kind of had to run a little quickly away last stream. Apologies about that. I had to get up quite early yesterday for certain things to do with life. And later on in the day yesterday, I was gonna stream, but I felt so tired, way too sleepy. I was lying in bed and I was thinking about streaming, and then my eyes would just start closing, and I'd probably just fall asleep on stream if I did that. And as much as that might be nice for like the odd ASMR stream, I wouldn't want that happening randomly. I don't think that would be a very good situation. Uh, what it did do, what I have realized though, is I've been streaming a lot since I started. I think that's only natural. You get into something new when you're super excited about it, and then over time, you kind of pull back. You kind of figure out how much you want to do it, how little you want to do it, where you're happy with things. And that hasn't necessarily happened to me. I'm still really enjoying streaming. I'm really enjoying just chatting with people. I'd love to do like a collab sometime with someone. I think that could be a lot of fun. But I should probably play a bit more games and understand how to comment on things first before or do like commentary first before I try that. But I've gotten to do a lot of the things that I've wanted to give a try, and I've been enjoying it. But I have just realized how busy my life is going to be for the next, well, a couple of years at least. At the very least, at least for next year, next couple of months, I will be very busy. I'll probably repeat this in like a tweet later or something, or a zeet, however it's pronounced. Uh, that's probably going to limit how much I can stream, especially next month, or well, this month. Sorry, I should say. I'm going to see if I can possibly stream where I'm going, because I'm going to be away most days of the week. But yeah, I'm going to be away most days of the week, and then maybe the weekends will be like kind of the time that I stream. And I'll probably just do, and as I start on this new thing, I'm going to have to be pretty dedicated to it. It's not going to be an easy walk in the park. So I may just have to. This might become a nice way to relax, I think. But I'll just have to figure stuff out. It's gonna be on my mind a lot now the past few days. Hello, Omega Knight. 118. Thank you so much for the first time chat. Medieval myth armor wasn't too heavy. Do you mean? I'm guessing you mean that the myth is that the armor was too heavy, and the reality is that you know people were intelligent back then, and they realized not having to carry a ridiculous amount of weight was a bad idea, and absolutely that was the case. And even for like the heavy armor as well, like the supposedly heavy armor of like full plate, that was still designed in such a way that allowed people to move effectively. That exactly them moving like turtles in some live action medieval stuff. Yeah, exactly. I've worn some armor before, and it's really not that heavy. It's definitely, it's noticeable. It certainly is. And I haven't worn a full plate outfit before. 30 kg at most, 66 pounds. And that's often spread over like a good amount of your body. Sure, it's extra thing, but like I would rather that and then be able to take a lot more damage than other things. But it was often, it would be balanced on your shoulders, on your waist, tied in such ways, because I mean these people were using them to survive, and they anyone will tell you maneuverability in both individual combat, in strategic and tactical ability is so important. The ability to strike quickly and efficiently is through all levels of combat is massively important. Thank you so much, Omega. How come I'm not hearing my alerts? That's very weird. Did May I ask? Did you hear an alert? Because I didn't, and that's slightly annoying. Did you hear the follow? A little jingle. I saw it. You did. Okay. I guess I just didn't hear it. Oh yes. I realized what it was. That's good. Thank you for notifying me of that little issue there. I hadn't turned back on the ability for me to actually monitor it, which is a little bit important. But I was doing some ASMR a while back. My two favorite medieval style games: Medieval 2 Total War and Mount & Blade Warband. I'm not a big Total War person, although I have played a couple of them. Primarily Attila. And then but Mount & Blade Warband is probably my favorite game of all time, particularly Viking Conquest. It is incredible. Absolutely incredible. And I've really enjoyed Bannerlord, the little that I have been able to play of it. But absolutely, for me, it would be Crusader Kings 2 and then Mount & Blade Warband. Probably Mount & Blade Warband on top, but it's a very close balance between the two. And I can imagine that you said that because the alert sound is from Mount & Blade. But that's very cool that you enjoy those series. I think anyone who is into history will enjoy those types of games. But for us, the title of my stream actually relates less to talking about any particular myths, and more about a particular book that I'm reading. Those Terrible Middle Ages: Debunking the Myths by Regine Pernau. I was reading a little bit of it last stream, and I'm going to continue reading it. We're actually in the middle of a chapter. Usually I don't like doing that, but I had to run, which was a little annoying. Play the 1257 AD Enhanced Edition. It's a superb mod for historical nerds. Yeah, that sounds... I've enjoyed some of the mods, although I found that my favorite has still been Viking Conquest, with the fan kind of patch, the big. Well, it's not just a patch; it's a big update. But I'll definitely check that out. It sounds very cool. I don't get much time playing Mountain Blade because it's one of those games that for me anyway, it's like I sink all of my time into it, or I just take a break. Viking Conquest Reforged, yeah, Reforged, and then the fan additions to it, that just makes it look so good, and it's so fun. Um, but yeah, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, I suppose I can cover those things in a tweet later, maybe. Um, just let people know that I'll probably be less available as I usually am. What did I want to do? Just want to make sure that everything is working as intended. Yeah. So I suppose what I actually, how are you, Omega Knight? Have you been well? Have you been having a good day? I hate the ignorant part of the myth. Mm. Um, it's definitely doing fine. That's good to hear. I've been pretty well. If not a little stressed, just with the things upcoming, but we get through it. We get through it. We're all gonna make it. But yeah, the concept of things like ignorance is definitely a big one. So for example, one that many people love, the common parlance story of Galileo being subjugated by the church because it went against their power, and um, it was the church wanting to stop any sort of scientific progress. That in itself is a misunderstanding of the entire situation. Um, there was multiple different models of how the galaxy was, or not the galaxy, sorry, the solar system was established. The kind of heliocentric model, which for many people they see it as a way of almost exalting humankind, but that's a completely misunderstanding of the theological and philosophical ideas underpinning that idea. They accepted scientific progress. They rejected revolutionary ideas on political dogma stuff since it could cause wars. So, like, exactly like what I was saying there about the heliocentric point of view, is that it wasn't that oh, the Earth is the center of the universe because it is the most exalted place. It's actually the least exalted. It's the most pure form of matter. Well, not pure matter, but it's the least divine. It is only in out. It's the least furthest, and the more universal one is in a theological sense, the more closer one is to the divine. So, but then with Galileo, it was more that he was just kind of a dickhead. He was just kind of from what I understand, he was quite like certain that his model was absolutely correct, and he stepped into trying to use theology in the Bible to prove him, which was going outside of his remit essentially. I think that's why he got in trouble with the church so much, is because he started interpreting like the Bible and saying that his was correct, and his model didn't necessarily have a full support of the evidence at the time. Now, of course, he was more correct than the heliocentrics and the other various models. I think there was like apparently 5 or 6 different competing models, although I couldn't tell you exactly about them. But I think even there even was someone who actually had a better model of the solar system, in that they attributed elliptical orbits rather than circular, in comparison to Galileo around the same time. It maybe not exactly the same. But yeah, absolutely. There was scientific progress. It wasn't just some era of backwardness. The only time you could maybe make that claim is like right as the Roman Empire fell, and just there was that loss of communication, loss of bright of kind of that situation where there was just so much calamity going on. But as this book that I'm going to begin reading there now in a moment or two points out, there's a lot to be admired in the medieval ages. So, to give a brief recap of what I can remember, essentially, so far, Regine Prenard has pointed out how they developed better agriculture than the Romans. I actually would have no idea about that. I know nothing about agriculture. Rene Pernau in this book, Those Terrible Middle Ages, has mainly been talking about how the thought of the Middle Ages as this dark age, this dark period of time, it came from this refinding supposedly of the ancients and their way of doing things. And then the Renaissance period men attempting to imitate that rather than, and seeing the past attempts at art and architecture and creativity within the medieval ages, within Christian Europe, as a failure to imitate those ideas of the good. The assumption was that they had achieved some perfection in some way. It came from the Renaissance era, talking down the medieval era to make themselves look better. And there was this massive tumultuous period. I mean, the war of religions and all that. So coming from that point of view, you could see them looking like immediately back. It's like they look maybe 100 years back and they see things were bad and they just assume that applies to the entire period, not understanding. And another thing then was that they had a misconception as to how much access they had to old philosophers and stuff. But she's mostly been talking about architecture. Oh God, I'd say that wasn't too loud. Let me just check my filters, make sure it's all good. Yeah. Mostly been talking about architecture and art, and pointing out how in her time, supposedly, the medieval artists and such were seen as the chapter of this title supposes, clumsy and awkward, primarily because they didn't abide to the so-called perfection of the Romans or the Greeks. So I think we will continue with the book, and I hope, Omega, that you enjoyed just kind of relaxing and listening to reading. And if you have any other really interesting points to put into the chat, that would be very cool. But I hope everyone's doing well. Um, Let me. Okay, I'll take a quick sip of the water, and we will begin. The classical perspective has had another consequence, from which we are not yet free at the present time. The method that consists in studying in a work only the origins, the influences from which it proceeds. It is of course understood that, since nothing is born of nothing, ex nihilo nihil fit, that wasn't in the text, that's just the Latin, I looked that up earlier. The study of sources and origins is indispensable in every discipline. But to reduce the history of art to the study of influences that might have led to such and such a form of art entails aberrant conclusions. The work of classical times appeals to the imitation of the ancient world. It refers to the models they were claimed. In any case, a sculptor could do himself glory for having perfectly observed the canons of Polycletes, a painter for having rigorously obeyed the laws of perspective. We know the wild enthusiasm of Leonardo da Vinci over the fact of having seen a dog bark at recognizing his master in a painting, because the resemblance was so exact. And it is enough to have looked through the code of conventionalism. Diderot's Essai sur la peinture, and I'll note that the author of this book is French, so much of her references apply to French aspects that I wouldn't be too familiar with. To understand to what degree painting itself was conceived only in relation to a whole system of laws and references by which perfection was guaranteed. That is, how he pronounces the laws of historical landscape, those of ordinary landscape, which would make the least informed reader shrug his shoulders today. The Renaissance wasn't exactly an era of peace and zero disease either. Nope, it wasn't. I don't know if they call themselves the Renaissance, but there was definitely, the Renaissance, the Age of Enlightenment. They definitely have and to be fair, it's from them, although it goes a little bit further back, that many of the ideas that come to be our modern day occur. But there's a whole lot of history there that I don't fully know. I only have a slight idea of it. I might do a talk on that sometime on stream. Less of a reading of a book and more of a, because it's a book that you really need to listen to all of it and sometimes reread multiple times in certain areas. So maybe just doing like a general overview of the book could be good. Using these same principles as the point of departure, a whole group of art historians have sweated blood and water to discover the origins and influences of the art of the Middle Ages, the sources and the bias on the basis of which imitation might have been carried out. For, in the end, it was very necessary that they imitated something, since art consisted in imitating either nature or the ancient masters who themselves had imitated nature, from which arose singular misunderstandings. In the 18th century, no one doubted that all our Gothic art had been implanted by the Arabs. In the following century, the history of art, which had become more scientific, nonetheless, set the principle of imitation as the point of departure. But since the distance between the work and the model was all too evident, they sought elsewhere. At the beginning of the 20th century, the historian Strzelecki entitled his work Orient ou Rome. The question seemed staggering. Today it seems almost rather naive. Failing to find the required model in Rome, they sought it in the Orient, a term whose blissful vagueness at least enlarged the field of investigation, and they ended in flagrantly foolish observations like the commentary we have already had occasion to note with respect to a capital of the Church of St. Androc de Salou, showing stylized foliage, leaves of alder, sacred trees of the Persians, Persian Sassanid influence. The image of the little Burgundian sculpture striving to imitate the Sassanid Persians can sum up rather well the errors entailed in the attitude of art historians persisting obstinately in studying, not the works in themselves, in the society that had seen their birth, responding to its needs, to its mentality, but in the relations of those whose work might have wit supposed archetypes, which the historian went on seeking sometimes at a great distance. In a parallel way, the classical vision led to an interest only in a figurative scenes, those that at least represented something. Awkwardly, it goes without saying. One could then rediscover the texts, identify the subjects invoked, re-establish relationships, bring out influences, practice at last for every one the exercises necessary to the art historian, according to the norms in use. Although Romanesque art may have presented a remarkable resistance to relationships and influences, and we understand that the Sorbonne rigorously insisted on this. Tendencies of this kind still would have tainted even the rediscovery of medieval art by the Romantics, whose merits can never be overemphasized. Let us recall that it was on much to Victor Hugo as to Viollet-le-Duc that we owe to the ability to contemplate Notre Dame de Paris today. Nonetheless, in their period, the principle of imitation continued to reign, even if, unfortunately, it was the Middle Ages they were imitated, just as previously it had been antiquity. The result was the Church of Saint Clotilde in Paris, a faithful copy of a Gothic cathedral, so faithful that it presented no special interest, any more than the Church of the Magdalene, a faithful copy of the Parthenon, did. Plus, I love how Charlemagne fixed the Roman writing with spaces in between sentences and punctuation. That's such a small detail. I've never heard of that, but that's very like there was a big issue with spaces within their writing. And maybe it was some kind of development that had occurred kind of after the fall, and things kind of got a little messy. Everything, oh god, everything was in the same line or spaces. Ugh. Oh, hello, Lancelot. Victor Hugo did kind of slap, to be fair. I saw The Hunchback of Notre Dame musical recently. Absolutely incredible. I haven't seen it, and I need to watch the movie as well. Imagine having to read a Roman wall of text. Yeah, that sounds like it would be horrible to read. Ew. I was only listening to my VTuber friend. I haven't actually. I need to watch it. I think I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I never sat down, or at least I probably did when I was younger, but I just can't remember it. I think. But my VTuber friend son Albionus was reading some of the Iliad earlier today, and he talked a little bit about actually reading how ages back they didn't really focus too much on rhyming. It was more in the meter of the poetry, and he gave for example some Roman or not Roman, sorry, Greek reading, and it was so interesting, so cool to see how he well uses meter and how it sounds. It's unique, and he discussed how often they would break down the words so that they would fit the meter, so that even the words may not be fully recognizable. I guess so. It would be like you've ne foreseen the movie. Now I can't do it because he seems like he's practiced this and he's into poetry, but it was sort of just like keeping that meter at all times. I don't even know what I was doing there, but he was able to do it in actual Greek, and it just sounded so cool. I was kind of like almost, and he sent me on a video later. It was almost like you could really get into it. I could easily imagine that if you understood it and you had someone like professionally singing it, it would be incredible. Now, the attention paid to the witnesses of those times called obscure in the artistic domain as in letters leads one to grasp to what degree all art in the Middle Ages is invention, an invaluable witness, for it lays the foundation for the value and interests of efforts achieved much later, in the century of artistic revolution. Artists like Monet and Cezanne were much closer to the painters of Saint Savin and Bears-la-Ville than to Poussin or Greuze. Artists like Matisse lived long enough to become aware of this. Quote, "If I had been familiar with them, it would have saved me 20 years of work," he said when leaving the first exposition of Romanesque frescoes given in France, shortly after the War of 1940. And it is very evident that the genius of Matisse was expressed in entirely different ways than that of the Romanesque painters. But the knowledge of the Romanesque painters would have brought him precisely that inner freedom that he could not have gained except little by little, in opposition to what he had been taught. A band I like for singing in fake Latin is Era. Ooh, I will. Let me. Okay, I wrote that down. I typed that down on a little page. So thank you for the suggestion. I will take a listen to them. School discussions about art invention or art imitation are of course totally obsolete today. It was nevertheless necessary to mention these subjects, for up to and including our generation they were of great importance, for they constituted the question of plastic or poetic expression. In feudal times, a poet was called a trouveur, one who finds, trouveur, troubadour, in other words, inventor. The term to invent, inventor, takes on its strong sense here, the one it assumes when we speak of one who finds a treasure, inventur, or of the feast of the finding, invention of the Holy Cross. To invent is to put into play both imagination and research, and it is the beginning of all artistic and poetic creation. To today's generations that seems obvious, yet it remains a fact that for 400 years it was the contrary postulate that was asserted with a similar obviousness. One can hardly be surprised if a certain disorder is manifest in our times with respect to the forms in which invention, the capacity for creation, is expressed. From this point of view, the study of the past can be very instructive. It is striking, in fact, that the lover of Romanesque art, travelling around Europe and in the Near East, can discover everywhere the same type of architecture, the same semi-circular vaults supported by the same pillars, the same half-circle openings. In short, monuments all springing from the same inspiration. The same remark could be made with respect to the Romanesque period as to more modern times, and the same criticism could be applied to it as is aroused by the tiresome uniformity of the great ensembles that are identical from one end of the 5 continents to the other. It is enough to say that the study of Romanesque art could lead the creator of our times to wonder where invention is situated nowadays. In fact, we are witnessing today a search for originality in painting, that, in painting, for example, verges on frenzy, while in a parallel way, the architect of the HLM, which manages and constructs public housing projects in France, says a note, and other popular facilities, renounces and abdicates, making of the city a universe of rabbit hutches at the very moment when, suddenly, young people become aware of the fact that man cannot live like a rabbit. Would the formation of architects be responsible here? The architects of classical times and the teaching of architecture up to our own times considered external problems, the effect produced, the organization of facades, the regular alignment of buildings, the pediments, the decorations done in the style of the ancients. No one thought, in France particularly, to begin by examining what the needs of the users might be. In a time when decisive progress was accomplished in the techniques of construction, the moment was not far off when it would be understood that one could do whatever without the architect. That the essential problems of the building were those of the interior, problems involving the resistance of materials, the installation of pipes, access, passageways, interior layouts, and so forth. But the first great achievements of a truly modern architecture appeared very far from our country, in Finland with Saarinen, in the United States with Frank Lloyd Wright, and so on. For it was in France that the canons of classical architecture weighed most heavily and at greatest length on the formation of the architect. The only builder in our country who was resolutely innovative, or who at the very least adopted principles taking into consideration the person who was going to live in his buildings, was a foreigner, Le Corbusier, who was not under the influence of the School of Fine Arts. Any effort today to maintain a place for the architect is totally artificial. The role for which he was prepared is no longer admissible. Born with the classical times, he probably died with them. The wild imaginings in which some of them indulge represent scarcely anything but costly fantasies. The architects to whom the construction of a new basilica at Lourdes was confided at least had the humility to draw up in advance their acknowledgment of failure and to prefer a purely functional, and in any case subterranean, edifice, which was much more useful. The contrast is surprising between this kind of admitted impotence in the domain of building and the unquestionable success in other areas like roads, causeways, aviation, technical successes that are also, most often, aesthetical successes. Would it not have been a crime to want, first of all, to do the aesthetical? Someone will certainly raise an objection here, citing the incontestable success of those dwellings and hotels of the 17th and 18th centuries, the mansions of the financiers or great government officials, not to mention Versailles. There is obviously no question of debating the point. They belong to an epoch and to conceptions that are obsolete today. They imply, besides, a taste for splendor, and even more manual traditions on the past of the builders that have gradually faded over the course of time. The churches of the Magdalene, is very exactly in the line of the Palais Bourbon, only the elegance has disappeared. The comparison leads us to pose the question of art and luxury. The 19th century never doubted their interdependence for an instance. The indescribable Thiers, in defending the bourgeois, did not fail to bring out the fact that it was the rich who created the work of art through their generosity. The whole classical conception proved him right, but he was unable to account for the difference between art and the art object, and the result was his personal collection, a frightful junk collection of antique plaster casts and prize copies of Rome in Louis Philippe-style surroundings. In the same period, those who experienced true artistic fervour saw themselves rejected by a society become decidedly incapable of discerning any artistic quality outside academic concepts. Whence the phenomenon that so profoundly marked the epoch and that made the history of art, at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, a true martyrology, misery, madness, suicides. It is enough to invoke the names of Sautin, Gauguin, Modigliani, Van Gogh, and so forth. Artisans of a pictorial revolution who freed us from the classical vision, who were soon going to allow the greater number to see in a different way than according to academic canons. They were banished from the society fixed in its habits of mind. Any feeling of admiration for their work, which seems natural to us, was at that time assessed as eccentricity. This attitude prevailed up to the moment when the French bourgeois suddenly realized that he had missed out on some excellent business and that art could also be a valuable commodity. Whence the opposite movement, which made a Gauguin in a public auction more costly than a Gothic cathedral, but which actually was only a very marginal chapter of true art history. And note 7 here says, a Gothic church in Senlis was put up for sale at the price of 13 million old francs. Paintings during this same period went for prices far beyond this value. The generations to come, the movement has already begun, will undoubtedly be more than a little scandalized to note that Ors let art into the lap of speculation, giving evidence even in this domain of the naive confidence in numbers that seems to characterize our 20th century. Its glory will not be heightened by it. And one might wonder if these young people who saw in the work of art a moment of ecstasy, a happening, to be produced and destroyed at will once the emotion is past, were not, when all is said and done, closer to pre-classical conceptions, apart from the fact, however, that they confuse the present with the instant. Throughout the medieval period, in fact, art was never cut off from its origins. We mean that it expressed the sacred, and this link between art and the sacred stems from the very fibres of man in all civilizations. Specialists in prehistorical times confirmed this fact for us, and as early as the appearance of cave art. Note 8. We will content ourselves with referring to the work of André Lerengouran, among others, in the Préhistoire de l'Art Occidental. So that was just a reference to that point. All races, in all climates, have in their turn attested to this intimate communion, this inherent tendency in man that prompts him to express the sacred, the transcendent, in this second language constituted by art in all its forms. Thus, each generation has had, across space and time, its own face, and the current facilities for travel and reproduction allow us to rediscover this face. Now it is very significant to note that the break, the falling off of artistic activity, corresponds to the moment when, in the 19th century, a mercantilist conception of the art object appeared, and it is no less revealing than the object of piety, a pitiable copy of the sacred for use of shopkeepers, appeared in the same period. Still today it is striking to see what degree artistic impotence is connected to the absence of the sacred. Certain countries, certain sects, certain churches too, even certain religious edifices display their distance from the sacred in all its forms by their harsh artistic indignance. And that is not connected, as one might have thought even as late as the last century, to wealth or poverty. For there is a true poverty that is often magnificent, that of the painting in the catacombs, that of so many of our country churches. On the other hand, the original beauty of many of the edifices has been destroyed today by zealous priests, motivated by a laudable desire for poverty, but confused about what is poor and what is merely squalid. Perhaps it is in this direction that we must seek the secret for that capacity for creation that made of the least Romanesque capital, so similar in its lines to all the others, so obedient in its form to the general architecture of the edifice, a work of invention, a work of art so personal that the most faithful copy, the most precise casting, shouts treachery. Its functional character and technical utility, far from harming the artistic quality, are its almost obligatory supports. Are its almost obligatory supports. For art cannot be added to a useful object, contrary to what Ruskin and his school believed. It is born with it, in its very spirit that animates, or else it does not exist. Such is at least what we learn from Gothic as well as Romanesque art, and this is a lesson our time is singularly prepared to admit. To sum up the question as a whole, It is not an exaggeration to say that in the Romanesque epoch, as in the modern epoch, architecture was conceived according to norms that were similar almost everywhere. That there seems to have been a certain agreement, whether conscious or not, about basic measurements or units, according to more or less deliberate plans. The clearest of that example of that is that of abbeys, in which the construction of buildings is everywhere the same, responding to the necessities of life in common: chapel, dormitory, refectory, cloister, and chapter room, with variants that correspond to the modes of life of the different orders. The small houses of the charter house, the barns and factories of the Cistercian, Cistercians, and so on. Undoubtedly, architecture never responded more to common designs across a variety of populations. Never was its functional character more strongly emphasized than with the construction of religious houses and fortresses. The necessity of the liturgy, in one case, and of the fence in the other, dictated the architectural forms. Yep, the iconoclast, so much Eastern Roman art lost. I know that the was it the Dominicans, if I remember right, one of the kind of groups of monks in in around the 14th century caused a lot of issues for the church, because they promoted a sort of life of following Christ and being completely in poverty, which goes against kind of this what the church was kind of doing at that time. And there was a lot of corruption in the church. No one is denying that. But there was this kind of big issue where they would kind of similar to that, to see art and things promoted in that way as being completely against what they should have been. I think it was the Dominicans. It wasn't the Franciscans. I'll have to look that up later. I might be misremembering something now. Thus we see similar Romanesque edifices across all of Europe and the Near East, far from the most humble little country churches or Knight Templar chapels built on a simple rectangular plane with a semicircular apse marking the choir. Even a chevet plat, that is the initial design, responding to the twofold necessity of a place of worship and a place of assembly, to the enormous pilgrimage church containing, around the choir, the ambulatory that allows circulation and onto which are grafted radiating chapels where travelling priests will say their masses, the triple nave, which corresponds to the triple door, tribunes to accommodate crowds, and so forth. Just as the differentiation that would appear in Gothic architecture was born essentially of technical developments, like the invention of intersecting ribs and that of the flying buttress. Just as the architecture of castles was linked to the evolution of siege tactics and to progress in weaponry. How, then, does each edifice look so distinctive that it is absolutely impossible to confuse it with another of the same type? How is it that the Abbey of Fontenay is so different from that of Tournai, when in both instances we are dealing with Cistercian abbeys responding to the same original necessities, to the same traditional norms, to the same design? How can these nuances be so marked that we cannot confuse three sister abbeys belonging to the same region, like Thorenay, Silvacane, and Senecio? In other places, the particularities could be explained by sculpture or ornament, but that, precisely in Cistercian churches, is almost non-existent, which is again an imperative of function, since the absence of sculpture, colour, or ornament is dictated by the desire for asceticism that characterizes the Cistercian reform. Now, from one monument to another, what we have is a reinvention of Romanesque art. The builder knew how to place his creative sense at the service of necessary forms, or better said, necessary functions, from which forms that are at once similar and endlessly new were born. It was a known fact at that time that man does not conceive of forms, properly speaking, but that he can imagine combinations of forms unendingly. Everything was for him a pretext for creation. Everything that his vision could suggest to him became a theme for ornament, ornamentation. For ornamentation is inseparable from the edifice and grows with it. It is an almost organic harmony. Let us understand, this does not have to do with a decoration or trimming, but rather this term expresses ornamentation in the sense in which the sword is the ornament of the knight, according to the example held up by the art historian, wow, that's a long name, Kumar Asawami. Is that right? Yeah, something like that. By ornamentation, we mean that necessary aspect of the useful work that moves or affects. Salami, it's like Kumar Aswami. The useful work that moves or affects, which in the etymological sense signifies setting in motion. We know then that in everything man conceives he must devote himself to conceiving it in splendour, whence the time spent in sculpting a keystone or a capital, according to what the stonecutter's imagination would suggest to him, without, however, going beyond the place assigned to it in the edifice. Whence, too, the colour that in the past enlivened the entire work, even a whole cathedral, outside as well as inside. Recent cleaning has permitted, as we know, a rediscovery of many traces of the painting that made an Armenian prelate visiting Paris at the end of the 13th century say that the facade of Notre Dame resembled a beautiful illuminated manuscript page. I guess that's touching on another aspect of where we see the medieval world as almost like kind of grey. I think I mentioned before that supposed filter they put over any art, any like historical period to make it grayer and dirtier and ugly, like how they turn Mexico, anything south of the border of America is yellow and dusty. Ornamentation, moreover, in Romanesque art especially, was dispensed only with an extreme economy, to conjunctures of lines or volumes, to openings, windows, portals. It makes one think of the ornamental sequences that at times intervene in plain chant, expressing as they do an impulse that enriches the overall melody. Finally, it is drawn from from few very simple themes. I've shown, or tried to show, elsewhere the importance of these themes of ornamentation, which are to plastic expression what the notes of the scale are to musical expression. Several motifs, which are always the same even though found in different civilizations, seems to have constituted something like a plastic alphabet of a time when one was in no way concerned to present nature, man, or everyday life as such, but when the most humble trait, the most modest touch of colour, signified another reality, enlivening a useful surface by communicating to it some reflection of the beauty of the visible or invisible universe. These motifs run through all Romanesque creation, indefinitively revived, sometimes similar to each other, like the chervons or pleated ribbons, the tirelessly accentuated arches, sometimes developed to the point of giving birth to aberrant vegetation and monstrous beings. The only representation that retain the attention of the painter or sculptor are those from the Bible, which is itself the most extensive repertoire of images that has been furnished to man, along with the visible universe, both Holy Scripture and creation, being at the time considered, quote, the two garments of the divinity. It was only just from the 13th century on that the vision changed, and that, under the renewed influence of Aristotle, an aesthetic of forms and proportions developed. So we can admire one by one all the Romanesque portals from Santiago de Compostela to Bamberg, or all the capitals gathered in the Museum of the Augustines in Toulouse, or even the clocks like those of Chappé or Tunus, in order to try to grasp what marks these perfect works with such a strong singularity. Everything looks cold and bleak, dirty and colourless. Yeah, it's quite annoying. It really is. But But we can also, quite simply, illustrate this sense of ornamentation, always renewed on the basis of the same theme, with respect to a detail of everyday life that was very characteristic of a whole mentality: the hood. This was the usual headgear of the period. It goes back to the mists of time, since the medieval hood is nothing but the hooded cape of the Celts, or ancestors. This humble cape covering the head and shoulders gave birth to the cowl of the monks, but also most to the headgear of men and women between the 6th and 15th century. It has always and everywhere continued to be worn as a hooded cape, like those of the shepherds on the rood screens of Chartres, or the peasants of Jean Boracon. But this same hood, placed too as to frame not only the face but the skull, while still composed of the same elements, is found continually renewed, whether by the material of which it is made, wool, velvet, satin, or by the way it is draped, the ends drawn forward, held in a turban, enlarged into a two-pointed hat, and so on, so that it gives birth to all headgear, those still seen in frescoes, miniatures, and even in the Fouquet pictures. This hood, whose initial form has not changed but is ever reinvented, is very characteristic of the man who wears it, both through its extreme simplicity and functional character, and through the perpetual invention in which the personality of the possessor is expressed. Thus, whatever the period, the garment itself is the theme of ornamentation. To come back to the history of art, it is enough to leaf through any manuscript whatever, even a simple charter of the time, to note the same capacity for creation, the perfection of the writing, the placement on the page, the seal that authenticates it, makes us see first-hand what a perfect work can be. Perfect, because it has truly been a creation. The one who made it is identified with his work, so much that in his hand it became a masterpiece. We cannot sufficiently regret that most manuscripts remain unknown to the general public. What a profit there would be in making them better known by using modern methods of reproduction. One ornamented letter is enough to reveal what artistic creation could be in the Romanesque period. Let us not even speak of those that recount, for instance, an entire biblical or historical scene. A quite simple initial, in its essential, readable, recognizable form, is found taken up anew by every copyist, every illuminator who made it his own and developed its inner possibilities, so to speak. It can be almost intoxicating. One becomes a veritable maze of foliage and interlacing. Another gives birth to an animal that ends in a man's face, or a man becomes a monster or angel or demon. None the less, the letter has not been betrayed. It remains, but ceaselessly recreated. And this is without doubt what characterizes Romanesque art, and Gothic art as well, despite certain excesses that marked its end. Respect for the essential function within a perpetual rediscovery of its inherent possibilities. Oh, hello, Clever. How are you? No worries. What did you miss over the last hour? Well, I didn't start reading it for maybe the first 20-ish minutes or so, and actually, I'm looking at the time now. It's almost bang on an hour. I mostly was just talking about random things. But we started reading, and we actually just finished the chapter. So you've missed a few pages, but not too much. Mostly, it was a continuation of what was happening in the last stream, where the author is pretty much pointing out that the sense of imitation that arose in the Renaissance and further on was and saw the medieval time as a failure in this reproduction of the supposed perfect ways of creating art that was kind of put onto the Romans and Greeks, was a misunderstanding of art and its place as at least from my reading, as a sense of personhood, as a sense of a people, of a group, an expression of one's identity and one's time. That, through the different ways that they conceived of architecture, that they viewed things, that they viewed art, that they created art, the color they used. She was only talking there about that the way the hat came often from in many different forms reflects the kind of ideas that would have been important to that culture. So too, the various ways that artists and architectures approached things came from their necessary functions that was required on them in their surrounding capacity or their surrounding reality. That they weren't trying to imitate something, that they were truly creative in that sense, taking the same things that had been there at all times. So, for example, the architecture in need of creating a church. They didn't just try and create another Parthenon or perfectly sculpted in lines with what would have been seen as the perfect architecture of the Romans, but rather built it as they saw it needed. But I hope you've been well, clever. I tried my best just to give a quick distillation of what we read. There was a lot of references to some things that I'm not too familiar with. A lot of it being French terminology or art history that I'm not too familiar. But I hope everyone's been enjoying the reading so far. Ah, yes, and Romanesque, good for exteriors, I think. Though I like the idea of going in and seeing ro- Rococo inside. I need to. I think that's one thing that I'm a little bit weak on is like. Obviously, I can recognize like a Gothic church and stuff, but like I don't read too much on like art or history of architecture or history of art and stuff. It's just an area that's kind of eluded me and not too. Even though I recently went to the art museum in London, and it's incredible. It really is incredible seeing art in person, being able to step close to it. There's some there that simply just mesmerize you. Be it, and sometimes it's not even like the most like amazing art. It's it can just be something about it. Like there was one I remember where it was like oh, I can't remember who it was, but the artist had drawn his wife just standing at a piano and she was looking at him. And the way he captured her gaze, it really felt like you could see the love both in her face, in like as if she was in looking at someone that she loved. But I think that more expresses the love that the artist has for her as well. And it was just really, it was part of a two-part set. I think there was another one of her sitting by a chair, but I think it was the one that was by the piano that really caught me. Something about the way she was looking at you, the paint, the person who was painting essentially, that just caught me. Another myth is the Muslims civilizing the Euro kingdoms. There is a sense, and it comes from like again this idea of the Middle Ages as this uncultured like barbarian state. Um, but it's a fairly uh, difficult topic. I mean, there is that one of like, oh, they taught people how to bathe, as if we don't have evidence of say Vikings, for instance, um, bathing. I know that there's like groups like who's that on Twitter? Fake History Hunter, I think that's what her name is, and she regularly goes after people who post stuff. Fake History Hunter, I think, is even a website that you can find that has loads of different myths. Of course, the Muslims did bring a lot of tidbits. So, for example, Averroes and Avicenna did allow for Aristotle to spread into Europe a lot more. Mathematics. I don't know about the history of mathematics. Oh no. Um, but even to the point that I think I was talking earlier or last stream about how and this is just something I've been that I only read recently, so it's very very much in my mind. So I apologize if I mention it again, but that the the kind of nominalists of the church viewed the Avicenna and Averist inspired Christian theologians with with suspicion that they were, in a way, infecting the Christian, the original Christianity, and getting away from what it originally spoke. Excuse me. I need a drink. I think I'll have to. What I might try and do is maybe the next time I'm reading, read through, like, skim the pages and see if I can pick up some of, like, if there's any mention to architecture or anything like that, so I can have like pictures. Because I feel like it would be odd to like stop a stream in the middle of a reading, like ruin the flow and try and look things up to see what she's on about. So I might try and do that just to give a bit more expression to it, I suppose. 2 moments. Ooh. Okay. Um. Sorry, I just had to check something, but we are back. So I think I might continue with the reading. Let me just see how long the next chapter is, because I might, if it's particularly long, I might just have to end in the middle of a chapter again. Oh no, it's only about 25 pages. Um, no, only 20 pages actually exactly, which means the chapter itself is 24. So that seems good. That seems good to me. Hmm. When I have a lot of old markings from this chapter. I see like pen everywhere, like highlighting certain sections or boxing in certain things. That's how I That's when I'm reading, when I'm like, ooh, I liked this section, or this section was very interesting. That you would, or I draw either a little box around that section, or if it's a particular line, I just underline it. But I just draw like a little section at the beginning of the sentence and then at the end of wherever I want to kind of close things in. Although what ends up happening sometimes is I'll read on and I'll realize, oh wait, the next few sentences are like really important too. So I like cross out the last box and like add it on to the end. It can make things look a little messy at times. And for particularly important parts, what I will do is I will box in, I'll box stuff in, and then if there's like multiple things that I think are very interesting, I will underline those then. If it's, say it's like an argument or something, oops, I hit my mic. Say it's like an argument or something, I'll box in the entirety of the argument, and then I'll underline certain aspects, for example. So I am almost out of water. I'm just gonna go grab some water very quickly. Okay, I'm back. I got my water. I love ASMR like that. That has like those little globes. You like turn them and they go like glop 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 glop. It's really nice. I feel like a little change up to the scenery. There we go. That's nice. So moving on to chapter 3, we have crude and ignorant. In the 16th century, letters escaped the postulate of imitation no better than the arts did. There, too, it was necessary to conform to fixed rules of the Greco-Roman genre. A tragedy had necessarily to include the three unities of time, place, and action. Any deviation was judged severely. Moreover, it was as true in letters as in the arts that only the classical centuries of the ancient world were acknowledged, that of Pericles for Greek civilization, that of Augustus for Roman civilization. The study of language and letters in general was thus reduced, in fact, to one particular written expression, that of 2 or 3 centuries, which as in sculpture were made the models. No other literary forms from those of antiquity, odes, elegies, the sonnet had been tolerated insofar as this was an acquisition of the 15th century that had obtained its lettres de noblesse in Italy, a country venerated because of the ancient herbs. A rigorous separation was maintained between genres, comedy on the one hand, tragedy on the other, and for the latter, which was judged to be noble, it was obligatory to seek its subjects in antiquity. It must have cost Corneille to have written L'Equide and Polyeucte, and to have respected the and to have respected the sacrosanct rule of the three unities only at the price of truly incredible acrobatic feats in L'Equide. As for Racine, more respectful of academic principles, his prefaces were expressly composed to excuse himself for slight violations of the law of imitation. In the better informed poetry, shepherds of Arcadia, nymphs, satyrs, and other fauns would evolve from then on, just as in the paintings of Poussin. There had even been a question in the 16th century of reducing French verse to the rules of ancient prosody and metrics, based on the patterns of stress that actually does not exist in the French language. An imperative of such narrowness, taking so little account of the distinctive genius of the language, could not be maintained for long. On the other hand, child of the ancient hexameter, the Alexandrine was retained, imposing its tyranny up to the Romantic revolts, and even much later still. So again, we see this this aspect of like this need to imitate, kind of stifling the actual creativity of the era. The imitation of classical Latin extended even to the study of the French language. There was an attempt to reduce the French sentence to the norms of the Latin sentence, whence the hair-raising rules of grammar and logical analysis that were imposed on students with the conjunctives of restriction, and other nonsense born in the heads of grammarians prompted by a sombre pedantry. That, too, was the source of our spelling, one of the most eccentric there is. It was in order to imitate antiquity that the word hum be provided with a h, that ph's were multiplied, and m's and n's doubled, and thus was established the inevitable tendency, though it was rather belated, since it arose only in the 19th century, to judge the education of an individual by his spelling. Certainly the rule had been adopted at the same time as printing, which had imposed a certain fixity in usage. But this was a great misfortune for generations of schoolboys who had to, and still have to, submit to the fantasy of Renaissance pedants, copied like all the rest from what ancient inscriptions dictated to them. We are witnessing today the shattering of this machine. There are some who are inconsolable about it. One can, however, wonder in what respect such a tendency, reactionary in its essence, was justified. It will seem to coming generations to be less and less justifiable. Let us repeat, the admiration one may feel for the ancient world is not in question here. In letters as in art, to adopt the classifications still in use, those in the Middle Ages had not ceased to draw from antiquity, without, however, considering its works to be archetypes, models. It was in the 16th century that the law of imitation in this domain, as well, was imposed. Now, up until the present time, our academic programs have been found in place only for classical literature, that which begins in the 16th century. A note here, let no one try to use as an objection the few scraps of medieval history or literature skimmed through here and there in the 7th or 8th grade. this could not be taken seriously. That which begins in... Oh. Is this intentional mutilation by which we are made to believe that letters and poetry did not exist in France before the 16th century admissible in fact or by right? We, in brackets here, in France, have fallen considerably behind today in knowledge of our own literary past, in contrast to other places such as Scandinavia, Germany, the United States, and German-speaking Switzerland. And this has been done through the whim of some academics and because of a few generations of inspector generals decided to. One very simple little fact seemed to me, a few years ago, to be significant on this subject. This was at the time when I was studying the letters of Heloise and Abelard, around 1965. I had wanted, in the department of printed books in the Bibliothèque Nationale, to verify the citation of Lucan's Pharsalia contained in the Lettre d'à un ami. Now, in searching through the books on the open shelf, I noticed that there were no fewer than 6 copies of Lucan's Pharsalia at my disposal in the department of printed books, 5 different editions of the Latin text, plus 1 translation. For a work that, let us recognize, is not necessarily a part or even an educated man's store of knowledge, this was a lot. The idea then occurred to me to see if I could find among the books on the open shelves a copy of Tristan et Iseult, or indeed any one of the works of Chériton de Troyes. I looked for a long time. The whole of classical antiquity, but not a single work for the period of our history that extends from the 5th century to the end of the 15th century. This is not acceptable. And she gives us another anecdote here in a note. A translator wanting to refer to the work of André Le Chapelain, a theoretician of courtly love who lived in the circle of Eleanor of Aquitaine and her daughter Marie de Champagne in the 12th century, made a naive inquiry of a librarian at the Bibliothèque Nationale. The latter referred to her to the incommunicable edition of André Le Chapelain, an extremely rare printed work in the 15th century in Gothic script, unaware of the fact that the author had been published 2 other times, in 1892 and 1941. It is, however, true that the first publisher was Danish and the second one American. On the other hand, several years earlier, in 1950 to be exact, during a stay in the United States, I had to write an article on Bertrand de Born. And again, I'm just gonna mention, I know I said it already, but most of her references are to France, because she was writing for a French public, so there's things I just do not recognize. I wish I could give mentions on these things. I was in Detroit at the time, at the city's library. I found the work I needed all by myself, without the least trouble, right on the shelf, following the remarkable classification system that our libraries have since begun to adapt. What on the other side of the Atlantic is accessible to any reader is not available in Paris to the privileged reader. Because in principle provided with university diplomas at the Bibliothèque Nationale. Nothing gives a better idea of the narrowness of our cultural conceptions. We who are so proud of our reputation as a people of haut culture. Oh, sorry, I read that line awkwardly. Let me do it again. Nothing gives a better idea of the narrowness of our cultural conceptions. We who were so proud of our reputation as people of haut culture. Is it conceivable that there were 1,000 years without any poetic or literary production worthy of that name? 1,000 years lived by men without him having expressed anything beautiful, profound, or great about himself? Who could believe this? Yet we, French, very intelligent people though we are, have been made to believe it, and for nearly 400 years. All Billow had to write was, Villon was the first, in these uncouched centuries, to disentangle the confused art of our old novelists. In order for the whole world to be convinced, Villon was the first in date of the French poets. This is found recorded in all the academic textbooks. Now, the 1,000 years in question saw the first appearance and development of the French epic. Whoever said the French did not have a head for epics was simply committing a historical as well as literary error. The invention of a new genre, that of the novel, which was unknown to classical antiquity, and finally the birth of the courtly lyric, which enriched the poetic treasury of humanity with a new strain. This courtly lyric had been studied in its origins and its evolution by an eminent Zurich scholar of Romance languages, the author of Origines et la formation de la tradition courte en Occident, which the Sorbonne has carefully snubbed. It is not easy, nevertheless, to maintain a complete silence about a work such as this by Reto Bezzola, which is comprised of 5 quarto volumes, filled with quotations and references that make it a kind of panoramic digest of the whole lyric poetry up to the end of the 12th century. It is beginning to be known here and there outside of university circles. I'm sure by now this was a quite old book, 1965 or so. So I'm sure by now things have even more rapidly become aware. The author unfolds for us the evolution of medieval letters, first in Latin, then in the 2 languages, Oc and Oil, or Old French. In following this evolution, one is startled to note that this poetry, in its expression and in its development, is intimately linked with that of the arts in general. The first expression of this courtly lyric poetry is manifested at the end of the 6th century with Fortunatus, who becomes a bishop of Poitiers, who addressed to Radegund, the foundress of the monastery of Saint Croix in Poitiers, as well as the abbess Agnes, some Latin verse in which all readily expressed sentiments dear to the poetry of the troubadours and trouvères of the 12th century. This previously unknown inspiration derived essentially from a new regard with respect to women, henceforth addressed with a respectful tenderness. Thus, in this world described for us as a battlefield where barbarity confronts tyranny and vice versa, is born this sentiment of extreme delicacy, which will make the woman, for all poets, a suzerain. One single writer has had the honour of surviving in our memory, the historian Gregory of Tours, whose name evokes for us the High Middle Ages, who leads us to liken all men of that time to the sons of Clovis, who, like many young people today, dreaded above all, as everyone knows, to have their hair cut, and all women to Queen Fregund, whose favourite pastime, as everyone knows, was attaching to her rivals the tail of a galloping horse. This allows us to label some 3 centuries as barbarous times, nothing more. Yet the same period of the High Middle Ages saw the book begin to spread in the form in which it still occurs today, the Codex, the instrument of culture, if there ever was one, which henceforth replaces the volume. The ancient scroll. Printing would not have been able to render the service it did without the invention of the book. It was also in... Oops, I hit the mic, not the book. It was also in this period that musical language was worked out that would be used everywhere in the West up to our times. In fact, there was intense poetical and musical activity at that time with the creation of many hymns and liturgical chants, and it is known that plain chant, or Gregorian chant, long attributed to Pope Gregory the Great, dates from the 7th century. The very names of the notes of the scale were drawn from a hymn of the 8th century in honour of Saint John the Baptist, Ut quaint laxis, by the Italian Guido d'Arezzo. Only a few specialists are familiar with the great names that illustrate the field of letters during the High Middle Ages, but that does not mean they afford no interest. A little curiosity about the subject would permit one to recognize the flowering of an original spirit and astonishing capacities for inventions in these orders, such as Virgil the Grammarian, or Isidore of Seville, in the 6th century, Aldhelm in the 7th, Bede the Venerable in the 8th. Those who have studied these works, written in a difficult Latin, of course, but much less difficult for us than classical Latin, have appreciated their intense richness of thought and poetry, their striking freedom of expression. Welcome in, Haru. How are you? I hope you're doing well. I hope you're enjoying the reading, whether you're sitting back just relaxing or whatever. I hope you've had a nice day, a nice weekend too. In letters as in the arts, it seems that the populations, liberated from the Roman yoke, spontaneously found once again the originality that they had in reality never lost. The classical culture, which disappeared along with Roman education, magistracy, and, in short, command, was succeeded by a new culture that owed nothing to academic canons. Historians rarely resign themselves to discerning the Celtic vein in this culture. With its prodigious faculty for verbal and formal invention. Yet it seems to me difficult to deny, in Gaul and in Spain as well as in Ireland and Great Britain, the origin of that inspiration that everywhere gave rise to renewal, the taste for enigma, the play of words and assonance whose affinity is undeniable with that foliage, interlaced design, that lyrical profusion that one who finds in the arts of the same period. Drown check. I could actually use a drink of water. Reading is thirsty work. Stretch, huh? Okay. I haven't moved from my seat either, so I do need this a little. Stretching is very important to keep you nice and limber. Move around, old. I'm not old. I'm not an old man. That's very. I did get some. Aren't you nearly 2000? Nearly, I am 2000. Yes, I am. Yeah, it's roughly that, isn't it? Yeah. I'm still limber. I'm not even old in body. I'm like well, not immortal. If I was yeah, more than more refers to just never living, or never dying of old age. Eternal youth in a fashion. Shut up. Stop. Old man has caught me. I wasn't expecting that. Aren't you nearly 2,000 years old? Yes, roughly that. 2nd, 3rd century is the Fenian period. Those capitals look so smug. Where was I? Oh yes. The manuscripts in which the Celtic genius blossoms, notably those preserved in the libraries of Ireland, have something in common with the masterpieces of Cloyson jewellery one can still admire, if only in the collection of medallions in the Bibliothèque Nationale, the Louvre or the Cluny Museum, and which, for lack of a better name, is called Merovingian in France and Visigothic in Spain. Someday we will need to make up our minds to admit the common origin of these diverse forms of expression in the West of that time. There is certainly an ocean of prejudices to confront, a mountain of indifference to cross, but already we might judge that the decisive step has been taken. For it was indeed the classical formation, the classical perspective, that until a very recent period prevented us from seeing in the works of the High Middle Ages anything but crude and barbarous productions. Since we cannot dwell on these works, the study of which will require volumes, we will content ourselves here with pointing them out for those who might seek a thesis topic elsewhere than in the century of Pericles or with the emperors of Byzantium. Here there is a practically unexplored source, which in our times might be greeted with a certain interest. We can, moreover, only bow before the admirable works of Pierre Riche, which have been definitive and deserve to reach the largest audience. Another important study has been done on Isidore of Seville, who exercised a profound influence on medieval thought. His work, accomplished in Spain in the 7th century, might be said to contain in germ the essence of this culture of the Romanesque and Gothic centuries. Now his intuitions would merit the interest of avant-garde thinking. The principal work of Isidore of Seville, his Etymologies, is based on the potential meanings of each word in a language, outside of any philological concern, of course. Isidore of Seville, encyclopedic genius, unfolds in the exegesis of the word an extensive knowledge based on comparisons, indeed at times on a play of... Oh, I almost burped, excuse me. That wouldn't have been very relaxing. Indeed at times on a play of words, through which a whole synthesis is worked out that is at once scientific, poetic, and theological. The fact that he quotes innumerable ancient authors implies that he had their works at hand. This gives some idea of the immense learning of which Seville was the centre in these high Middle Ages. These details are often forgotten when the translations of Aristotle subsequently done in Spain by the Arab philosophers are discussed. They could never have undertaken such a task in Seville, or elsewhere in Syria or other regions of the Near East, if they had not found there libraries that had preserved the works of Aristotle, and well before their invasion, that is, before the 8th century in Spain. Arab knowledge and thought could only draw from pre-existing sources, from manuscripts that made this knowledge of Aristotle and of other ancient writers possible. It would be a perfect absurdity to suppose the contrary, as some have nevertheless not failed to do. The fault goes back to our scholarly textbooks. Oh, so I guess I was my knowledge was somewhat wrong. I hadn't heard of Isidore of Seville, which mention Avicenna or Averroes, but pass over Isidore of Seville in complete silence. It may be because the book that I was reading did point out the conflict that stemmed in the church between the Avarists, who were seen as the kind of classical kind of what's the word? What am I looking for? Scholastics versus the kind of newer view of how it should be run with the nominalist revolution. But it might be that with the synthesis of that Thomas Aquinas did with Aristotle and Christian theology, that perhaps their view was kind of painted by this idea as well, without knowledge that maybe Isidore of Seville had more knowledge prior than Averroes or Avicenna would have provided. I'll have to look into that now later. See how much Isidore of Seville might have known. It could be possible that he did mention Aristotle, and he had a good understanding, but it might be that Avicenna and Averroes had a particular view of how to read Aristotle that does play a role in influencing later Christian thought, not being the progenitor of it, but rather influencing it in a certain direction. Jacques Fontaine has even remarked how, in architecture, the horseshoe arch, generally attributed to the Arabs, existed more than a century before their invasion into that Visigothic Spain they had so well studied. Curiously enough, a kind of sharp check would be given to this momentum, felt at least in France and the Germanic countries in the 8th and 9th centuries, affected, of course, by external events, the Arab invasions from the south, and let us not forget their extensions up to Poitiers and Autun. I believe that was where Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, defeated them and the Norman invasions to the north paralysed life in a large part of our west. Province, until late in the 10th century, 1972, lived in terror of Saracen raids, in quotes. The Bishop of Marseille could not reside in his diocese up to that date, and afterwards the abbeys on the coast had, with difficulty, to rebuild their ruins and reconstitute their numbers. But another factor intervened that, on the other hand, had an unarguably positive side: the restoration of the empire in the West. Is it Voltaire whose quote is the Holy Roman Empire is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. You see that sometimes posted by like meme accounts on Twitter, and there's people arguing over it. Taking over from the Roman Empire, Charlemagne, when he undertook to restore learning and culture, did it in according to the Roman norms. He founded an academy. He provided us with a script for which we owe him a debt of gratitude, writing that he borrowed from Roman epigraphical characters. There was, under his impetus, what many academics, happily surprised, have described as the First Renaissance, an attempt to return to ancient norms. Had the empire survived, we would perhaps have known from that time on the civilization of classical inspiration. We would perhaps have known from that time on the civilization of classical inspiration that emerged in the 16th century. In Charlemagne circles, the lyrical vein, the study of language, the rather obscure endeavours by these poets called, for want of a better term, Hesperics, from the name of a collection that gathered them together, Hesperica Famina, gave way to a more reasoned literature in which a return to the ancient culture was attempted. The poets of this time celebrated glory, dazzling feats, and also friendship, but, as Bizola remarks, the love of a woman has no part in them. They practiced a court poetry by adopting once again the ancient genres, idyll, elegy, I don't know what that, epithalamium, and tried to revive classical letters. Welcome in, Ruadh. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. What's up? Thank you so much for the first time chat. Hey yo, welcome in. We're just doing a little, and thank you so much for the follow. Very kind. I hope your weekend is going well. You pronounced it right. Don't worry. Excellent. Well, I'm one who regularly struggles with people trying to pronounce my name. But I am Ruadh Uaquilta, a half human, half Tuatha Dé of the Fenians. It's a pleasure to meet you. We're just doing a little reading, so I hope you enjoy. Charlemagne, who himself tried to revive the Roman Empire, founded at Aix-la-Chapelle the Palatine Academy, which gathered poets, grammarians, the learned, from all corners of that Europe which for a time was united under his powerful magisterium. They took evocative surnames like the poet Angilbert, a Frank, assumed the name of Homer, while the Visigoth Theodulf was called Pindar, and the Englishman Alcuin, Flaccus. Oh, that's oh my god, what's his name? He's the Shu, isn't it? Shu Sakurai. He makes some really nice art. He's the art mama and rigger of a VTuber I really like, Jay. I found you from. Hey, I'm guessing you meant Jay. That's so nice. Thank you. Thank you for joining. I really like Jay. He's especially when he's doing ASMR. He is the most naturally soft voice I've ever come across. It's so relaxing, and his model is so nice. Shu really does an amazing job with art. His design is very very recognizable. I think that's a very important part thing in an artist. Um, many artists can look great, but it can sometimes they can kind of like blend in with each other. But sometimes then you see certain artists like Toete, and Shu, where it's like almost instantly, yeah, that's them, and it's almost a surprise if you see anyone who has a similar art. It's kind of like do you guys know that that YouTuber Set Zine Tech? He's like a game reviewer, but he's like a big shit poster basically. Very very funny game reviews. Um, I don't think I do. No, no worries. But he's basically he has a very certain rhythm of talking and a way of telling jokes that that has spawned, I think, a whole host of creators on YouTube that really copy but sort of like imitate his style of talking. Because on the one hand, it's a very very effective and funny way of telling jokes and editing. But also, I think because for many of them, it does just click with them. But it's really funny, like clicking on a video and being like, this is a zine. You can tell that someone is inspired by them. But often sometimes they can just blend in. It's like, okay, you're not bringing anything new. Other times they do, by approaching certain games, maybe that he doesn't do, or doing challenges or stuff, that they differentiate themselves and they're able to make their yeah. He's definitely brought a very interesting group. Somewhat insane and lunatics, but people like Reggie and stuff, and ambiguous amphibian are really good. Side eye. Why are you side eyeing me, Haru? But yeah, Shu Sakurai is a really really great artist, and Jay is so comfy. Where was I? I've lost where. Oh yeah, here it was. The arts of this same period, moreover, were also inspired by classical forms. They sought to resemble their models in nature, and some Carolingian manuscripts give us portraits quite as individualized as the Roman busts done under Augustus. Among the works of this period, notably the miniatures, it is not difficult to recognize the twofold source of inspiration. The original influence, Celtic interlacing, the exuberant foliage, the richness of the combination of forms, and the controlled aestheticism, columns with Corinthian capitals, concern for exactitude in landscape and perspective, respect for anatomy in the representation of people. Certain monastic centres like that of St. Gall, faithfully translated the efforts of the imperial reforms that were to revivify the ancient culture in its most classical expression. This reform is, moreover, interesting for us in that it calls on all the resources of the immense empire and, particularly, on the monasteries of Ireland, those privileged centres of learning that were not affected by invasions. It is in Ireland that one finds the most learned grammarians of the time, and among them the best Hellenists. Shu is really nice, and Jay is heavenly. mm, mm. He does heavenly. I was a little bit slow to pick up what you meant, but yeah, Angel Boy VTuber, very very comfy. I would definitely recommend anyone who is looking for ASMR to go check out Jay, or even just in general. He's very nice. Other tendencies existed, however, that this rather artificial resurgence of ancient academicism scarcely touched. We find an expression of it in the poem by Theodulf, or Pindar. He describes the members of the Palatine Academy listening to a poem, whose form, in the style of Ovid, was approved by each as perfect. It was composed of distiches, whose learned versification was appreciated by all those present. All, with the exception of one, who was insensitive to such aesthetical delights. This was a Frankish warrior named Waibod. When, at the end of the poem, the audience poured out their acclamations, he lifted his hairy head, gave out some grunts that made the members of the illustrious Academy laugh, and finally, furious, left the room amid their teasing. Might there not have been a comparison to make between this Waibod, the Memborus Heros, as Theodulf calls him, the man of war left cold by the distiches inspired by Ovid, and so many young people, also long-haired, who no longer want classical traditions, or even so many technicians who, knowing the value, interest, and often the urgency of technical developments, would find it vain and fastidious to be delayed by academic processes. Waibod at the Palatine Academy makes one think of an astronaut lost in the Academy Day inscriptions. I feel like that's a reference to something I don't know. Now less than 200 years after Charlemagne's death, the taste for letters was able to flower once again in the West, which had become more stable, at last delivered from invasions. And it was not an imitation of antiquity that was reborn, but indeed the original Celtic inspiration, enriched by all that the various people had been able to bring to it. It was the Waibods who triumphed, and who were already working out a literature, springing from their history and from their own genius, freed from all academicism and independent of ancient influences. The French language epic was born in this 11th century, spread by word of mouth, and soon set down in a few manuscripts. The names of Roland and Olivier that we find on deeds that of this time demonstrate that the Chanson de Roland had already spread by then, transmitted by minstrels and narrators. Commenters had worn themselves out seeking a historical origin for it. As ill luck would have it, a passage from Einhard seemed to prove them right, and so they struggled hard to see in the story of Roland the source of an epic whose subject is above all precisely epic, the work of imagination, a poetic construction. It appeals to a legendary Charlemagne only in order to raise, in contrast to the flight before Islam, whose theatre at that time was the Byzantine Empire, the lofty figure of the defender of Christianity, the protector of holy places, which in this 11th century had been twice destroyed. Let us recall the Battle of Manzikert, which in 1071 handed over Asia Minor to the Seljuks. My Wi-Fi is horrific and keeps buffering every 2 seconds. Oh no, Wad's up. I hope it manages to cool down a little, to improve. It seems on my end I have my issues are like I don't have any issues, so it seems to be on your end. I think. Hopefully it improves. In other words, and Bezzola has demonstrated this perfectly by relying on texts of that period, it is in the society of the 11th century itself that one must seek the reason and inspiration of the Chanson de Roland, just as of other epics, and not in a historical source, to which the poets sought in any way to refer. The historians of literature which made the same error as the historians of art, they have transposed into the feudal period an imperative that was only felt during the classical period, the obsessive concern in their works for origins and models. It is also in the society of the time that one must seek the source for the courtly lyric that blossomed again, after its eclipse, in Carolingian letters. It dawned at first in Latin, in the works of Baudry de Bourgil, and of so many unknown and unrecognized others. Then it blossomed in southern France, where the extraordinary poet William of Aquitaine would give it an incomparable inspiration, assuring its prestige down the ages. In his wake, like others like Bernard de Ventadour, powerfully personal. In his wake, others, like Bernard de Ventadour, powerfully personal, while cultivating a similar form of lyricism, expanded the full possibilities of sentiment developed in the seigneurial courts, from which it would draw its name as courtly lyric. This is poetry profoundly connected to the feudal society, in which all relations are founded on the personal ties by which lord and vassal are reciprocally committed, promising the one protection, the other fidelity. The woman becomes the lord of the poet, the suzerain. She demands fidelity. She arouses a love that also commands respect. Amour de long. Distant love, which creates a stirring tension between contrary feelings. And this is, paradoxically, the joy of the poet. To the lady, he vows a kind of fervent, constant cult. She is all-powerful over him. The love that lives between them remains as lofty secret that he could not betray, and it is by Senhal, a surname, that he designates her. It is, moreover, a characteristic of this period to make great use of emblems, of signs and of Senhals, the coat of arms and armorial bearings that the knight carried on their shield, that any natural moral person had engraved on his seal, were a part of this same tendency. Yeah, it is. A Wi-Fi booster was down and that was causing the issue, hopefully. Oh, well, at least you found out what it was, so hopefully it should be all good. Some have wanted, and one wonders if ignorance is truly the only reason for it, to give this courtly lyric sources foreign to itself, to see in it, for example, the expression of a secret doctrine, that of the characters, of course, the character having taken on epidemic proportions ever since the men of the Sorbonne became aware of his existence. We are not overemphasizing this point, as the error has been demonstrated, with a concern for historical truth that must be applauded in passing, by one of the most fervent supporters of the Carther cause, René Nelly. To enter fully into the courtly lyric, one must first of all know the period that saw its rise, and most commentators do not. So again, we see this this assumption that the creations that came out of the culture of medieval times was seen around this period by her respective historians as being caused by something or having some kind of source from which they were attempting to imitate. And not to say that they weren't inspired in some way by other things, or they didn't know of the other areas, but they didn't seek to imitate them. They weren't they were maybe pulling inspiration from places, but they were still using the reality of their areas, of their cultures and such, to create. It is expressed not only in the canzos of the troubadours and the songs of the trouvères, but also in the chivalric novels. The novel, one more invention of the feudal period, and one that cannot be understood out of context. If most of the characters come to us from the Celtic legends, through the brilliant work of Geoffrey of Monmouth, one cannot still grasp King Arthur, the Round Table, or the Quest for the Grail, if one does not place himself in the concrete life, the very institutions of feudal times, and, to begin with, that of chivalry. They may be stories of fantasy, but all their details remind us that they sprang from a society for which, first of all, personal ties were important, a society that exalted the ideal of the literate and courtly knight, one that idolized fidelity to one's given word, and finally, one that made suzerains of women. In retrospect, it is extraordinarily that work so rich, of an inspiration so original and so dense of content, could be passed over in silence like this, unknown by anyone, even educators. For several years now, however, these works have aroused an apparent interest. Pocket editions of Eric et Enide and Tristan and Isolde have been published. Some authors have been attracted by the person of Lancelot. A faculty of letters created a chair of medieval iconography. Another included the quest of the Grail, for the Grail, in its program. But can one really draw profit from these works and savor their poetic significance without at least an elementary knowledge of the society that gave birth to them? Quote. There's a break here, and a quote. The entrepreneurs as well as the players are ignorant people, the mechanical artisans, knowing neither A nor B, who have never been educated and who who have neither eloquent speech nor proper language, nor the accents of decent pronunciation. These illiterate people, with no understanding in such affairs of squalid conditions like a carpenter or constable, a tapestry maker, a fishmonger, have played the acts of apostles. One must reflect a bit on these lines in order to understand all they contain. They are an excerpt from the parliamentary decrees that, in 1542, forbade the Confrères de la Passion to continue playing at the Hotel de Bourgogne, where they were still producing medieval mystery plays for the common people. The decrees were renewed in 1548, while still later, in 1615, the comedians of this same Hotel de Bourgogne, bent on the ruin of these Confrères de la Passion, who, for their part, persisted in continuing their theatrical activity, declared, quote, "This confrère has neither received nor produced anything but coarse artisans, who, in consequence, are incapable of public honour or responsibilities and unworthy of the title bourgeoisie. Through the reasoning of the ancients, who made slaves walk with the artisans." We can see what is at issue here. The comedians, who would end by having the establishment awarded to themselves for their own productions, aimed to destroy what remained of medieval theatre. Why? Because the latter was a matter of popular spectacle, and because the confrère was not made up of professionals. Many causes are at work here. Theatre people were tending, as in general were the masters of all professions, to form a corporation, or rather, to use the vocabulary of the period, a mastership or wardenship, which postulated the monopoly on the practice of a given craft in a given region. For, contrary to what was once believed and some still repeat, disregarding the results of 100 years of scientific research, the golden age of the corporation, an 18th century word, was not the 13th century, when it was encountered only as a complete exception in Paris, for example, but indeed the 15th and above all the 16th century. 12. And even where a corporation was not explicitly constituted, the example of the monopoly that was conferred on it gave rise to the search for similar monopolies. This was the case for the theatre people. I think corporation, when it refers to the 13th century, might be thinking of the kind of corporatism, where it sees all things as referring to the Latin corpus of the body, in which all things kind of run in tandem. I think maybe it's talking here more about like then in the 16th, kind of like the business idea of the corporation. For this reason, we see them pursue the popular theatre with a veritable fury, to such an extent that at the Saint Germain Fair, the unfortunates who were playing pantomimes, seeing that they were forbidden to speak, began to sing. Some have seen that as the origin of the opera comique. But it is good to appreciate in all their pungency the reasons enumerated in the parliamentary decrees. They testify that the confrères de la Passion, who were enacting the Acts of the Apostles, or some gospel scene, or the ancient mystery plays, were simple, humble. Carpenters, tapestry makers, and so forth. These were mechanical artisans, those who practiced what were called mechanical arts, which is to say, handcrafts. Now, these people, in the 16th century, no longer had a right to education. They had to walk together with the slaves. For this had been the case in antiquity, a peremptory reason. And, like all artistic forms, the theatre, a noble genre, could henceforth be the prerogative only of literate, educated minds, capable of appreciating the rules of the three unities and the separation of genres, which was unknown in the popular theatre. The comedians would achieve their end. We know that, and maybe by comedians they mean writers of comedy and actors. Comedians here might make us think of stand-up comics, but I have a feeling it might not have been that. We know that, having become the Knights comedians, they would have the theatre monopoly bestowed on them by Louis the 14th. Or no, sorry. Yes, 14th. That would permit Boileau, with superb ignorance to write these lines of verse, which unfortunately everyone has remembered. The theatre, shunned by our devout ancestors, was long an unknown pleasure in France. In reality, what died with the Renaissance was this theatre that was still in touch with the masses, that called forth the crowds among whom it recruited actors and spectators. Yet, despite this persistent will to put an end to its tradition, this theatre was so lively that it survived even to our own time. Here and there, when the artisans of the village of Obermagau play the Passion, each in his traditional role, they are reviving the memory of an essential phenomenon of medieval life. To be ignorant of this is to be deprived of 5 centuries of extremely varied dramatic expression, of which only the farce de Maître Patelin, which is amusing but a bit brief, has been retained. Reading to someone reading whilst reading myself. I do that sometimes too. I've done that a few times as well, and it's a weird experience. There were theatrical productions everywhere very early in the medieval ages. We see it rise in a liturgical context at an earlier period. Scenes from the Bible, especially from the Gospel, were dramatized. There is also mention made in a text dating from 1933, thus from the first half of the 10th century, that, during the Easter night, there was a dialogue between the angel and the holy woman, come to the tomb of Christ, all undoubtedly represented by clerics or monks, who played the scene as alternating dialogue. These paraliturgies were then developed, Easter night, Christmas night, and so forth, commemorating in general all the feasts of the year. The theatre was thus linked to a sacred function, to a celebration through which the interior life was expressed. But there was also an educational value, so the theatre was in large part found in schools and universities. The statues of a Parisian college, that of Hubant, contain several illustrated pages describing the everyday life of the students. Now, nearly half of these illustrations, like strip cartoons, show them occupied with dramatic plays. Our period has in large part rediscovered this role of the theatre in life. Cultural life groups, even some business concerns, use theatrical activity, and there have been even applications of it in psychiatry or in various cases of mental re-education. We are obviously closer to the state of mind that made the mystery plays spring up in the hearts of medieval cities than that which prohibited them. A master like Gustav Cohen, moreover, understood the importance and interest of this medieval theatre, and also understood that one can study it only by playing it. In any case, no one would argue today the importance for the young, and even for those who are not so young, represented by this occasion for expression through word and through gesture. The word guest is, moreover, one of the key words of the medieval ages. Geste. We should also recall the music with which all education begins. We have seen how our civilization, from the musical point of view, still remains indebted to the obscure times that invented the scale. Leaving this subject to the specialists, we will only dare to recall that an essential difference exists between our music based on rhythm and music based on the measure, which, itself, was introduced only in the 16th century. It was music measured to antiquity. It does indeed seem that, from this point of view as well, we are actually closer to medieval times than to the period that saw the birth of chamber music. In fact, whether vocal or instrumental, medieval music was perceived more as a music of atmosphere than as a spectacle, properly speaking. Up until the 13th century, moreover, there was no separation between musical language and poetic language. There was no poetry without melody. The poet was at the same time a musician. It is important to remember that at that time, if not everyone learned to read, everyone did learn to sing. And that ends that chapter. I hope you've all enjoyed the reading so far. I think I'm going to leave it there. The next chapter is about 25 pages. Yeah, so I can do 2 pages next time. Drown check. Thank you, Haru. I certainly need it. It can be at times hard to follow the book, I find, just because of the references to French. I was already doing it. I was stretching a little. Um, just to the references. Is that a bald emote? They bald. That's a silly emote. Cute. Um, just to the references of like French aspects of things. But I hope at least the more specifics, like references to medieval theater and those kind of conflicts that arise, are interesting. I suppose I think I said it earlier at the beginning of the stream, but I might say it here as well. Um, so I came to realize yesterday at a certain event that I'm going to be quite busy for the next while. Um, with October, I'm going to be away in another place most days of the week. I might be able to stream on the weekends, and I might be able to stream 1 or 2 days on the week if I'm able to work something out. But it will kind of depend. Um, but like for the next, I'd say 3 quarters of the year, my life is going to be very busy, very busy. Um, Education, learning stuff while also working. It's going to be GG. And that probably means that I won't be able to stream as much. I know I've been streaming a lot, um, but I'll still be doing stuff when I can. I'll probably use this as a way to relax and refresh my mind. Thank you. Just I admittedly I am a little stressed at the thought of how how to approach things and what I'll be doing. But I think I'll be okay. I think I'll be okay. And all the lovely people that I'm meeting here, and if I'm able to do like collabs and singing streams and other fun things, it can help to be like a release from that area. I can relax here. But yeah, I just thought I'd let people know that I'll probably be. I suppose as well. Getting into streaming for the first time, I've been streaming a lot. I think maybe in the past 2 weeks or so, I've only had 2 days where I didn't stream or something like that. Anyway, 2 or 3 days maybe. But I was streaming a lot, and I think it's just like you get into something new and you're super excited. Fire start. This is fine. um, and there's a natural period where you kind of figure out where you kind of want to base things, but I'm still in figuring that stage out. I'm still really enjoying streaming. Don't think that like I guess I want like if things slow down, it's not because I'm not enjoying things. I definitely am. It's a lot of fun. Oh, thank you guys for the head pats. Um, but I'll try and do other stuff, and I'll have like art stuff to do and new items. I'll try my best anyway. Um, but yeah, I think I think that's all from me. I hope you've all been well. What else did I mention? Did I mention anything else? Uh, what are those eyes? Zoom. Oh god, they look like they're coked out. Oh, those are some really cute emotes. Komai Rui. I really like the pop one. It's bouncy. Ah, okay. once once I have my design, I will be able to Rusan Kawaii. They seem anyway from the emotes. But once I have my finished design, and I don't tell my mama, but I was watching her stream some commission art of me. She was doing the art. I don't know if she knew. I was just kind of watching, and it looks really cool. It looks really cool. Um, I was kind of like I was sneaky. I was sneakily watching. I can't tell yet. Only when I get back. I actually should probably say to her, like, "Oh, this is my account." Like, in case she was like, "Oh, I'm going to post this as like an update on my account," and then she like links like my other Twitter, and then you guys would see stuff. Would see. Well, you wouldn't see anything bad. I don't like too much on that account. That's like suspect. Let's say it's mostly just retweets of art. Um, but yeah, I should probably warn her about that. But yeah, it was looking really cool. And oh my god, when I was watching her do art, and I was like, oh my god, there's so much work involved in creating a model. It's like, wow. Thank God for actual artists. I can see why it costs so much, as it does. Because I wouldn't know the first place to begin. But ooh, what's I'm just looking for someone to raid. So Momomo is doing some kind of special event stream. Momomo is he's like a squid VTuber, cute. Oh, he's like a captain. He's a space. Ah, I see. Um, I think we might raid them. They have a nice German accent. It sounds. It's not ASMR, so those of you who are enjoying the ASMR, although to be fair, me reading isn't particularly ASMR. I think it's more just like a chill background sound or something to listen to. It's not like specifically trying to affect ASMR. But yeah, I think we'll raid them. So let me. How do I raid again? Yeah, this one. So, yeah, I'm gonna end the stream there. I guess we'll just do like Rua raid. Yeah, Rua raid. So that's what we'll shout at him. But I'd like to thank you all for accompanying me on this stream and enjoying the reading. I hope you all have a lovely end to your weekend, and a quick end to the rest of the week. Garev Mahagat and Slongafoil. Thank you all. Thank you for the stream. No worries, Heru. Bye bye, guys.